So welcome tonight to the Glasgow Azure User Group. We are on our 23rd meetup, which seems like a small number, but also a large one since we started back in 2017. We've been running for just the community sense to share knowledge and to have a bit of fun and to meet new people. You've probably heard our inane chat for the last 10 minutes, but usually we are a good fun bunch. Thank you to everybody that has joined us again at another meetup, and welcome to new people as well. Thank you for supporting us. Now, my name is Sarah Lean. I am the organiser behind this user group. I am the one that has been sending you tweets and emails and stuff like that. And Gregor is also on the organising committee, and he was the one that managed to organise our speakers this month. So thank you to Gregor for that as well. Tonight, just be mindful that our code of conduct is to be friendly to everybody and patient and welcoming, be considerate and respectful of everybody's opinion and time. I do ask that you kindly stay on mute while our speakers are speaking. They will tell you how they want to handle questions, either be in the chat box or if you come off mute, but please do give them the respect of I don't want to say be quiet during the presentation, but please be respectful of their time that they've been given up as well. Now, tonight we'll be finishing off with our traditional quiz, and our quiz prize for tonight is a £15 gift voucher for a Scottish sweetie store called Star Rock Shop. They're based up in the kind of east coast of Scotland, and they do traditional Scottish sweeties. The woman who owns that shop, I believe her name is Liz, has actually reached out and said that she'll give a small prize to the second prize winner as well, because she's thankful for the support that we are giving her tonight. So first prize will be from us, and it'll be a £15 gift voucher, and whoever wins the quiz or whoever came the second tonight will also get a prize from the shop as well. So worth hanging around for at the end of this evening. A huge thank you to our sponsors who have continued to support us even though we've went virtual. Really do appreciate all of their support. Please do reach out to them if you're ever in need of anything that they offer. On that vein, we actually have one of our sponsors tonight, Servent, with a representative. I think they've actually two representatives from the company tonight. And Reese is going to give a quick overview of who Servent are and how they can help before we kick off speaking tonight. So Reese, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I can take over. Let me just get my slides open and share my screen. Can you see everything?
Yes, we can see that.
Oh, that's great. Sorry about that start there, guys. So I'll start with introducing myself. I'm Reese, a cloud engineer over at Servent. A bit about myself and background. I've worked in IT not as long as a lot of people in this call, only about 5 years now, starting off really where everyone else starts at first line, but got myself into Windows Server and did that kind of third line support role there. It was actually due to this user group that I was able to breach into the Azure world and, you know, become a cloud architect. And I've got a lot to thank to Sarah and the guys here for that. Servant, as you know, is a sponsor, therefore, when they said they were hiring, they showed it here. And the rest is history. So just a wee bit about Servant here. Servant are a CAF-ready partner who have several Microsoft partner competencies, you know, several gold. You've got some silver underneath there. We are actively involved in the community, as you can see here. We like to join and sponsor as many of the communities as we can, just to give a little bit back. We're one of the original sponsors here at the Glasgow Azure User Group, as well as one of the original sponsors with the new Welsh Azure User Group, who are doing a fantastic job recently starting these past few months, as well as one of the main sponsors at the Northern Azure User Group. But as I said, just love to give back to community, and we're going to try and see if we can do more in the future. The tagline for our business, as you can see here, is Modern Enterprise Acceleration. I'll speak a bit more into that as we go along. So who are we? We are a Glasgow-based partner who work across the UK and beyond. And whenever, you know, jobs occurs for beyond, we go beyond that. We're one of the top UK Azure partners, working with Azure since 2010. Some of the, you know, senior directors and senior engineers will talk about when it was back to Project Red Dog. I don't really know that, so I'll take their word for it. I've only known it as Microsoft Azure. All of our offerings will sit under the one banner, and that banner is a journey to modern enterprise. So with this journey to modern enterprise, it's that left to right approach, starting with our cloud assessment. This is the typical entry point for our customers. This is where we'll take their data, look at their environment, whether that be multi-cloud or on-prem, assess it, then feed back to them what our recommendations and what we really think. We then move on to the Azure Foundation. This is where we'll build and design an enterprise scale landing zone and evolve it to whatever the customer desires. We'll just use that CAF readiness, the cloud adoption framework to really get them a great landing zone and a great foundation. We then move on to the Azure Pathway and Azure Data Path. That's usually for us the data set enter exit for our customer. This is the core of our business. And again, we start with the left to right approach on that DC migration. We have a pedigree with moving a lot of our advanced workloads, whether that be SAP on Azure, and again with Oracle on Azure. Something that I've been working heavily with is our VDI offering in Azure. I'm sure you've all heard of it, WVD. We're one of the top WVD partners based on our internal IP and the size of deployments that we've put out. I'll just move on to that a wee bit more. So these are some of the current engagements that we've been involved with, and they're all ranging at different points. You know, some come to a close, some just starting. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my favourites here. So I've been heavily involved with the first one, that is the WVD deployment with Azure Education. We have enabled 72,000 users access to WVD for our higher education customer. This has been absolutely massive, and it's been great considering that we're trying to help with the COVID relief and make sure that teachers can teach and students can learn. We're also deploying Azure vWAN across 4 global regions, and that's for our market leader customer in aviation. We're going to be using Azure vWAN and building out an enterprise scale landing zone for them. Really looking forward to that one. Another one that's also quite close to my heart is other WVD deployment of 22,000 users within just the standard education. As I said, data center exits are our core business, and as you can see at the bottom, for 2021, we're hopefully trying to get around 20 data center exit migrations in plan, with approximately 10,000 VMs with these migrations. It's going to be a lot of fun for us. Servent, you know, we're moving on and we're building bigger. If you need to get a hold of me, rhys.mcdowell@servant.co.uk. Send me an email if you want to chat or talk about any of this, or if you'd really just want to pick my brains on anything. If you can't get through to me, curious@servant.co.uk, and they'll be able to get back to you. Again, I'll be staying around watching and chatting in chat, and I'll be taking part in a bit of the discussions at the end of it, maybe grabbing a beer between then. So thanks very much for listening to me, and I'll let Sarah continue.
Awesome, thank you for that, Rhys. Our first speaker tonight is Anaïs, who will be talking about Kubernetes. Anaïs, take it away.
Hello.
I will stop sharing.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
yep.
Perfect. So how do I share screen to like that? Do you see it? Do you see this?
Yep, I can see your screen.
Awesome. Yep. Okay, so my talk is titled, this presentation is titled Using ArgoCD to Deploy Crossplane Manifests to Kubernetes. If that's like confuses you or you don't know what most of those tools that are described in this title are, don't worry. I didn't know a few weeks ago when I asked one of my colleagues, hey, do you know a cool topic that I could talk about, that I could show on how you can use Azure and Kubernetes together? So my name is Anaïs. I'm a developer evangelist at CodeFresh, which is a DevOps automation platform, and we integrate with different cloud providers. And if you want to connect after the meetup or you have questions, I'm pretty active on Twitter. So that's like the main tool where you can reach me. Let's go one slide back. Yeah, before I started in DevOps and working with these kind of tools, I worked for several years in the blockchain space. So this is all fairly new to me, and I'm highly focused on the Kubernetes cloud native ecosystem. So I will try later on to answer your questions, but I will try. And this is like, take all of this as basically me looking at new technologies, figuring out different ways that those can be used to make business processes, deployment processes of your applications more effective. So first of all, I have a little question for you to better tailor what I'm talking about to what you are using, what you're looking at. If you could in the chat, and maybe I can find a way to open the chat. If you could type into the chat, one, if you are using containers, if you're using Docker on a regular basis, that would help me a lot. If there's nobody using it, that's also completely cool. Just so I have an indicator of you using containers, whether that's Docker or another containerization tool. That would be great. Okay, cool. So just type into chat. If not, that's cool. Just so I have an indication, so it's just like a hands up that you have on meetups. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief overview of Docker and Kubernetes to kind of set the scenes of like what the tools that I'm showing you and basically how they can be used and the different methodologies are used for. So Docker is basically a tool that allows you to package your application, everything that's needed for your application, the dependencies, the code itself, everything that's needed to run the application into one container image. And that's defined within a Docker file. So you have like a Docker file, which is just like a file. And based on that file, you can build with Docker a container image. Now, that image defines how you can run that application, that service, whatever it is. And by basically packing everything up into containers, into Docker containers, you can easily share your code between different machines, between different users, between different developers. You can push your container images to a container registry, such as the Docker Hub, and that allows other people to access your application and run your application that you have built based on that Docker image. Now, if you have a really large-scale application and you have, for example, a huge store, and you have different containers that are running each one part of that application, then you want to find a way to manage those containers, to make them interact, to basically communicate with each other. So if you envision you're going shopping, online shopping, and then you select, for example, some shoes in one area of the shop, and then you want to go ahead and select some trousers, but your shopping cart doesn't show the shoes. So obviously those different parts of the application, they have to be made communicate. And that can be done through Kubernetes and Kubernetes-based tools. So for Kubernetes, just envision it as like this box that helps us manage containers. It runs several nodes, so you can tell it basically how much resources it has to run containers, how much space it can take on your machine. So that's basically a very brief overview. Just think about containers, ways of packaging up our application, and then Kubernetes ways for managing those containers, those packages. So where we want to get that, why do we want to use containers in the first place? Why do we want to go through the struggle of using and learning about Kubernetes and Kubernetes-based tools? So when we think about way on how we either make a bug fix or deploy a new feature to our application, we first start off by developing that feature or fixing the bug. So we develop that and then we want to test it. There may be some teams involved, the QA team, the development teams. Once you have it ready and you want to deploy it to the running application, you have to ensure that you don't break any security configurations. You have to ensure that the networking still keeps working and so on. Now, depending on the logistics within your team, the size of your team, and various different factors, right? This process can take a few days, a few hours, a few minutes, or up to several months, right? And that can be really expensive, both in terms of like time-consuming, costly, but also frustrating for customers who might be waiting for a new implementation, for a new feature, and so on. So what we achieve with containers is a microservice architecture where we basically have different services. So in this case, there are just 4 different services highlighted. Imagine each of those are running in its own container. They are basically a self-contained kind of application that's running separately. But altogether, they are comprising the application that then the user can access. So with us using Kubernetes clusters to run those containers, to run those different parts, those different services for our application. We can have global networking and security configurations in place. So when we want to make changes to our application, so for example, we want to make a change to service 2, we can deploy that change without affecting any other parts of our application. In contrast, if we have a large-scale monolithic application where everything is intertwined with different dependencies and so on that have to be taken care of, it might be a lot more time-consuming and complicated to deploy updates. Yeah. So if you take anything away from using Kubernetes and containers and so on for your to create a microservice architecture, is that ultimately what we want to achieve by using those tools is higher automation. It's more efficient development life cycle overall. I'm just looking at the chat from time to time. So if you have any question, maybe type question before so I can see that. I will be answering questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to type it. Just make sure that it's maybe highlighted in a way. So yeah, we want to let machines do what they can do best instead of us doing the manual tasks. So everything that I'm showing you here is really focused on how can we make our processes more effective, how can we define more of our resources in code and automate those and the management and deployment of those. So I'm going to look at and show you how you can use these 3 different tools that are based on Kubernetes to manage applications more effectively. Basically to, well, in this case, to deploy resources, to deploy infrastructure to your Azure Kubernetes service just through Kubernetes manifest. So think about this way, that we're going to use Crossplane on a local cluster. Let's start from the beginning. So I'm going to basically show how you can deploy, how you can set up infrastructure on your Azure Kubernetes service just just by interacting with Kubernetes instead of interacting with the UI, instead of setting things up manually. So this is basically based on a principle called GitOps, where we want to ultimately define all of our resources in code. We want to append all of our resources in code and push all of our resources to Git. Everything that we are using should be managed through Git ultimately. So if we define all of our resources, whether that's our infrastructure that we are using to deploy our application or our application itself, if we define everything within code and we can manage that through Git, it allows us to collaborate more easily on the resource that we're setting up. So think about it that way. If I want to explain you how you can set up infrastructure, you can set up a specific tool, anything where we are using a UI. I can show you step by step the different buttons that you have to click, the different things that you have to set up to get to the end point. However, along the way, you might get lost. You might not know which buttons I clicked, or if it's a recording that's maybe 6 months old, the UI might have changed and so on. So it's really difficult in case of us doing manual tasks to replicate those across different users, across different machines. So what we want to do instead is to automate the setup of our infrastructure as well as of the deployments of our application itself. And that can be done through GitOps. And GitOps is ultimately just a practice, a way, a methodology of deploying software. So through us, basically, let's walk through the process. We have a developer, and the developer wants to update the application. So let's say service 2 is right now just a circle. And the developer is saying, nope, I want to be a square. It has to be a square now. So the developer is going to change it into a square, build the update, basically, develop the update, push it to Git. And then once it's within Git, whether that's GitHub, Bitbucket, or any other Git version control system, they can file a PR. And once they file a PR, it basically creates a new state of what our application is supposed to look like. So we have here our cluster, and that again is just like, envision it as a box for our Kubernetes resources, where all of our different containers run within and are managed by Kubernetes. So we have within Git, we have our resources defined and how, in this case, just service 2 is supposed to change. So service 1, service 3, and service 4 is not affected at all by that change. And the agent that's here managing these different resources, those different parts of the application, knows that and is going to keep track of any changes that happen within Git. So the agent is monitoring consistently our state in Git and basically what the developer pushed to Git to see if anything has changed. So in that case, the agent is basically looking at it and is like, oh, okay, something within service 2 has changed. So we have to update the application. And then the agent can go ahead and make sure that our square is now our circle within the old state of our application. The circle is now going to become the square. And deploying basically the new state. And another way to think about it is basically the imperative way of defining our resources would be that we have in our head this perfect lasagna that we want to make, that we have maybe eaten once at an Italian restaurant. And we now want to figure out how to make that perfect lasagna. Now we could go ahead and we can put different spices into our sauce and try out the different pastas and so on until we might end up with that lasagna. However, that's quite difficult way of getting to the end state. And if you make your lasagna at the same time, you might end up with a complete different lasagna than I am. However, if we follow the same recipe, then you can follow that recipe and I can follow this recipe. So in this case, the developer is basically through Git telling this agent here, hey, here's a recipe and I want you to do exactly what's within that recipe. And that's a declarative way of defining our resources and basically managing our resources. And that agent, in our case, is Argo. Now, Argo is an open source tool that is based on Kubernetes. So it uses Kubernetes resources to run and to do everything that it's doing. It's part of the, it's a cloud native sandbox project, the NCF sandbox project. I chose this tool. Well, first of all, because it has a really amazing UI. So in this case, I'm going to click buttons. And then it also has, for those who prefer to use commands, it has a really nice client. So you can use either. It's more accessible. And within Kubernetes, we have different ways that we can define our Kubernetes resources. So in most cases, or in many cases, we would use YAML files. So basically files that are written in a certain way and to tell our Kubernetes cluster or Kubernetes on how it's supposed to deploy our application. And Argo basically integrates really nicely with everything else that I'm going to show you. It's part of our ArgoCD, which I'm going to use specifically as part basically of the project family from Argo, which also includes these following tools, which I'm not going to look at now. So basically what you should remember about Argo, like before the little demo, is that it's used to, we're going to use Argo to tell it the state of our cluster, to tell it basically what resources our cluster should have. We tell Argo, here is this file, and we want this file that defines our application and everything that we need and going to use to be deployed on our cluster on Kubernetes. And Argo is basically going to take that file, that application, whatever it is, and going to deploy it on, make sure that it's going to run on Kubernetes on our cluster. And then once it's running there and we make any changes to that file, to that version that we gave it before, then Argo will then compare what's currently on Kubernetes and what we have defined now. So it's going to make sure that if the circle turns into a square, it's going to make sure that the square is actually going to be running on our cluster, on our Kubernetes. And this is more or less how it looks like. I'm going to show more detail in a second, how the UI looks like. And then we're going to use Crossplane. Now, where does Crossplane come in? Crossplane, we're going to use it to provision our infrastructure. So while we give ArgoCD, while we tell Argo, this is our file that tells us what infrastructure we want to have, ArgoCD can't actually make that infrastructure happen. ArgoCD can't go to our Azure account and then tell it, hey, we want to have this cluster up and running. Argo doesn't do that. Argo doesn't have the capabilities. However, Crossplane has the capabilities. So we can tell Argo that we want to have these resources up and running. We want to have this infrastructure, this cluster up and running on our Azure account. And then ArgoCD will go to Crossplane and be like, hey, please make this happen. Please set this up and get it running. And then Crossplane has the information to our Azure account and can go ahead and make it happen and provision those infrastructure, those resources. Now, Crossplane itself is also a CNCF sandbox project. So they are basically in the same kind of similar realm. They are both based on Kubernetes resources. They are both, you use them through Kubernetes, those tools. So you deploy them basically on your cluster, and then you can use them. So for those who know Kubernetes, who know containers, it's those both ArgoCD and Crossplane are combining custom Kubernetes controllers and custom Kubernetes resource definitions into declarative APIs. What that basically means is that both of them are Kubernetes resources in themselves that run on a Kubernetes cluster, and that's how we can use it, how we can interact with it, and how it also can interact with other resources within Kubernetes. Now we're going to use it directly with kubectl. Kubectl is a command line tool that we use to manage all our Kubernetes resources itself. Now, where does Azure now come in our Azure Kubernetes service? Now, we are going to start off with a completely empty account. There's nothing going to be running. There's nothing where we can deploy any application right now. At the end, I want to have a running application that we can use. So I like personally Azure Kubernetes Service also for other projects because it's really easy to set up and everything. And if it's so easy to set up, then you might wonder, okay, so why using a tool? Again, by using Crossplane to tell Azure what kind of infrastructure tools, what kind of resources it's supposed to set up. Well, again, this goes back to the example from earlier. If I'm just pressing different buttons, so for example, if I would click on the UI and add a new Kubernetes cluster, and then I might set up different configurations in the UI, you might not know exactly what changes I made, what I set up. So it's not as easy to replicate on your own account. Now, diving into the demo. Now, this is going to be not a comprehensive start to finish demo, just more like of how it's actually going to work. So right now, I'm here in just a local directory, and I have right now both ArgoCD as well as Crossplane installed. So they are both running on my cluster, and I can both communicate with both of them. I can also check that they are all set up correctly through kubectl and then get all in namespace. And as you can see here, these are all the resources that Crossplane right now uses, and it's running on my local cluster. Now you need basically any form of Kubernetes cluster. In this case, I'm using the Docker Kubernetes cluster to use those resources on your machine. This could also be, I could have also set it up directly on an Azure Kubernetes service. I could have done that instead and then created another Azure Kubernetes service. So it's kind of like the egg and chicken problem. Which cluster do you have first to create a new cluster? So all you have to remember basically is that those two resources are installed here, both of them. I also have right now ArgoCD running locally, which we're going to take a look at in a second. Now, how do I set up Crossplane? How do I use that? How does Crossplane even know how it can interact with my Azure account? How does it know how to access it? So the documentation is quite step by step on like walking you through it. So basically, first you set up all the resources, and then once you have the Crossplane client installed and everything, you select a provider. So in this case, right now, Crossplane has 4 different providers. So this is the Azure provider. And we're just going to set up a file here for these commands that has all the information, all the credentials that Crossplane needs for us to connect to our cluster. So if I go ahead and I can just quickly show you, I'm not going to show you the credential file itself, since I don't want you to have access to it, like to those credentials. But basically, after you run all of those commands, you will have this credential file. And then based on that credential file, you can create a Kubernetes secret. So it's basically just packing it all nicely up, everything that Crossplane needs to connect to your Azure account. And then once you have that, Crossplane can use the secret to access your Azure account itself. Now, then we set up the provider itself. And this all, once you have all of that set up, I have already done that, you can then go ahead and provision your infrastructure. You can go ahead and create YAML files. That is it here. That we can use then to tell Crossplane how to provide, like, what kind of infrastructure do we want, how to set it up. So in this case, this is a YAML file that we can use to interact with Kubernetes, that we can use to tell Kubernetes and Crossplane in this case what it's supposed to do. And in this case, we want to set up 2 resources on our Azure account. So we have those 2 resources here. The first one is basically a simple resource group with just a name of the resource group and then the location where the resource group is supposed to be. Now, this is based on this Azure Crossplane API that has also, there's some really comprehensive documentation that was really nice. So you can see basically all the different specifications that you can use to set up those resources. And once we have that, once we have the resource group, we will go ahead and set up our cluster itself. Now, the cluster is also this name, and then we're going to provide some specifications for the cluster. All good? There's like some background. Maybe there's a question. Okay, I'm just gonna, if there's a question, feel free to ask or type them in the chat. Also, there will probably be some time where it will take to set up all the resources, so I will have some time to answer questions. Cool. So we have this resource definition. Basically, this is going to translate into a Kubernetes cluster on Azure, and that's what we're going to do next. So we are not going to tell Kubernetes directly to use this file, since we want to have it within Git. We want to have it version controlled. So here's this exact same file just on my GitHub. I hope you can see it. It's just the exact same file. And then we can take, basically, we can take this Git repository, and we can go ahead and go to our ArgoCD application. And here we can tell ArgoCD that it's supposed to deploy those resources. It's supposed to tell our cluster, hey, we want to create this. We want to create this cluster on Azure itself. We want to set up these resources on Azure account. So I'm just going to give it a name, and project is going to be default. So those are just some variables you have to set. And then we're going to provide the repository, the GitHub repository that we just looked at, which has my resources defined within Git. And the path is going to be just the directory itself. And we're going to use, in this case, it's supposed to communicate with our local cluster, with the cluster where Argo runs on right now, with on that Kubernetes cluster. And the namespace is default. So all you have to remember is basically from here that I'm giving Argo the resources that it's used to tell Crossplane what to deploy, what to set up on my Azure account. And once I have all of this, I can go ahead and create it. And then Argo is now responsible for communicating with Crossplane on my cluster itself. So they are basically communicating, and Crossplane is able to talk to my Azure account to set up that cluster itself. So here it says right now that it's out of sync, meaning basically that the state that is right now here within my Git repository is different to the state that Argo has right here. So if I refresh, if I sync this, since I have the sync set to manually, so I have to manually sync both the state that is within my Git repository and the state that's within Argo. It's going to make sure, it's going to compare basically the state that it gave to, or the resource that it gave to Crossplane are the same that are within my Git repository. So now I can go ahead and have a look at how the cluster is basically created. So if I now go ahead and say and look at the resource group that it was supposed to create, can you see this? I hope you can see this. If not, please let me know. So right now it set up this resource group just now. And once it has this resource group, it will set up the cluster itself. Now we can take a look at my Azure clusters. And here, as you can see, there's an error message. So it doesn't have right now, it couldn't find the resource group yet. So let's wait a second maybe for it to find it. Yeah, so here it created, basically right now it's creating my cluster on Azure. So I can go ahead and watch the cluster creation. As you can see here, this is the cluster that's right now set up on my Azure account. Right now it's not ready yet because it's still in creation mode. Now I can go ahead and go to my account. So this was completely empty before. Now I'm going to refresh it. And here's the cluster that I just set up through Crossplane and ArgoCD. So it's still in creation mode. So it's still not ready yet. So once it's going to be ready, we can deploy applications to that cluster itself. But until then, let's maybe walk through one more time, like what actually happened here. So I told ArgoCD, hey, I have this Git resource. I want to deploy this resource here. I want to deploy these resources here that are defined within Git, within my Git repository. So ArgoCD knows that this is the repository and this is the YAML file that it's supposed to use. Then it's going to go ahead and talk to Crossplane, and it's going to say, hey, I have these resources. Please make sure that they are deployed. And Crossplane is then seeing, okay, it's supposed to be on Azure. I have all the resources to deploy that cluster, deploy those resources on Azure. I have the secret to log in, to basically communicate with that Azure account and so on. And then it can go ahead and set up that cluster. Now it takes about usually like 2 to 5 minutes for a cluster to be created. And then once it's created, we can set up, so this is basically refreshing every 2 seconds, so we can see when the cluster is ready. Are there any questions right now? Anything I can go and look at in more detail? Any comments? Any confusions? Anything I can go back at? Yeah, I'm using Windows Subsystem Linux, and so I'm using 20.04 Ubuntu. And I hope you like Argo. I think it's a nice tool. I like also. I mean, I'm personally using it through the UI because I'm not too good with long commands. They scare me a bit. So I'm using it through the UI and basically kick off everything else that it's within Git itself to deploy those resources. So what else? Let's have a look at our cluster and see if it's ready now. No, it's still not ready. So as long as there's no error messages, like it's still in cluster, like in the creation mode, it should be normal. So it depending on, earlier it took like 2 minutes once, and then it took like another time, it took 7 minutes. So it can take some time. Yeah. So let's see if that's when it's going to be finished. What I like specifically is that I can set up those resources without having to navigate. And again, it's not an issue within within my Azure account itself to set up the infrastructure resources to use Kubernetes, since it's pretty straightforward. But there are other tools that make it a lot more difficult to find out how to set up the Kubernetes clusters itself and how it's going to be managed and so on. And having somebody give you that file, right? Having somebody give you that prepared file that tells you exactly how everything is set up, and then the according commands, that makes it a lot easier for you to set it up. Okay, now we are ready. We can deploy our application. Now I took this application shamelessly from the Microsoft documentation. It's a nice voting app. So this is basically the Kubernetes file that is going to be used, that we're going to give to the cluster itself and to deploy that application. So we're going to tell it basically these are the different resources that we want to set up to run the application, and then it's going to go ahead and deploy those resources on our Azure cluster that we just set up. So for that, however, right now, as you could see at the beginning, I'm currently connected to my local cluster. So I'm connected to my local Docker desktop cluster, which is not of much use in this case. So we have to connect now through I'm going to use the Azure Client tool. So I'm just going to connect through that cluster that I just set up. So I'm just going to overwrite my configuration file. So now if I go ahead and I again look at the cluster that I'm connected to the exact same cluster that we just set up. And now I can deploy the resources. I can deploy the application to that cluster. Now, in an ideal case, I wouldn't do that through the command line. I would, again, just use ArgoCD to do that. I would, again, just tell ArgoCD, hey, I want to create a new app, and then just tell it the Git repository where I store all this, like this entire file. However, setting up ArgoCD also takes like some time to set up all the resources. And so I'm just going to do it right away through the kubectl command tool. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say kubectl, and then we want to apply the resource, and we're going to say we're going to apply the file with the voting app. So it's basically right now I'm in a Crossplane directory, which then goes into the app directory and accesses this file with our resource definition that tells it how to set up the application. So we're going to go ahead and just deploy those resources. And Kubernetes is going to set up everything for us. We don't have to do anything else. What we're going to do now is make sure that everything is running like it's supposed to be running. So right now, it's going to take like also another minute to set up the application. And once it's going to be set up, we're going to receive an external IP that we can use to then access the application itself. So everybody will be able to access it. So right now, it tells you basically when you look at Kubernetes, it tells you what resources you want to have, and then the current resources that are running and whether or not they are ready. So in this case, we want to have, for example, from our pods that are actually running the application. So in this case, for example, here our front end that is going to run it. Right now, it's not ready yet. So we can all to make sure that once it's ready, we're going to see it. So right now, it's basically just, again, watching my Kubernetes resources to see when they are finished, when we can use them. And as you can see here, now one of the pods that are running our application are now ready. Now, those are based on those containers, on those Docker containers that I mentioned before. So we gave them to Kubernetes and told it, hey, please run this application for us on the cluster that we just created. And then it's going to go ahead and do that. Now, once this is right now, it's creating the container itself. It's running the container. And then we can go ahead and access the application once it's finished. Are there any questions, any comments? If not, we're just gonna wait for the application to be ready, and maybe then I can share the link to it. So in that case, everybody will be able to access that. So right now, what namespace am I using? I'm using my default namespace. So I didn't spend much time. Yeah, I could have also deployed the application on a separate namespace. So right now, if I say kubectl get namespace, what you want to do when you're using Kubernetes, you want to set up different namespaces. Now, these 3 namespaces are set up by default. When you create a new cluster, they run different Kubernetes tools, manifest, everything for you to be able to deploy the application. And then you have your default namespace. And what you usually want to do is create a separate namespace like I had on my local cluster with ArgoCD and Crossplane running, because that allows you to then pack up everything that's all the resources that are needed for one application together. So once you want to delete your application, once you want to clean up, you can just delete the namespace and everything else is deleted as well. In this case, I have everything within my default namespace since it's only one application. And once afterwards, I'm gonna remove everything anyways. But usually, you want to create a separate namespace, so we can have a look and see if it's now ready. So it's still creating the container itself. If there's an error message or if it's really taking too long, we must have a look at what went wrong. But yeah, let's maybe go back to the presentation, and then later on I can post the link, share the link. So yeah, that was the little demo of using those tools that I just highlighted, that I just talked about. Yeah, if there are any other questions, also feel free to tweet at me. Here's my Twitter handle. Happy to connect and talk more about all those tools. And here are some resources. Maybe if we share, I'm not sure if we share, like if I can share the presentation later on. So if you want to take a look at those tools, if you want to look for that GitHubs or so on, I thought I'm just going to post them here. If somebody's interested. Awesome. That's it. That's what I want to share.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That was really good. Does anybody get any questions or any comments or anything? They've all gone shy, Anaïs.
Oh no.
I think there is one around costs for Argo. Is there any cost involved?
No, ArgoCD is completely free. Like right now, so if I say free, if you want to have it in a way that it's effective, that you could effectively deploy all those resources, you wouldn't necessarily want to use it locally on your local cluster, because right now you can't access this. Like this is all only for me, right? So in that case, if you want to have it like effectively running, you probably have to like pay for a cloud provider to run it on a cluster there. But ArgoCD itself and all those tools around ArgoCD are completely open source. You can use them, you can modify them, anything. So.
Oh, so here we'll stop talking nonsense and let you
and let me talk nonsense, right?
Not at all.
Okay, let me find. I had to like reboot and all that stuff, right? Let me find the presentation and then we'll get going. But yeah, thank you all for your patience and the invitation to be here. Alrighty. Let me organize my screens here. What's interesting is that Teams in the desktop didn't work, but it worked in the web. All right, so let me switch these things up here. Probably this one, full screen. Can I share from here? Let's see. Oh, it says only meeting organizers and presenters can share.
Sorry, let me find you. That was me. There you go. You should have the rights now.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm sharing the right one. Are you all seeing the right one, like the full?
Yeah,
not
I can
the.
see you. Yep.
Okay, great. So a little introduction to myself. My name is Gwyneth Peña-Siguenza. It's a long name, so you all can just call me Gwen. Most people do. I'm currently a training architect at A Cloud Guru, an Azure VP, YouTuber. And this all has happened within the last year, so it's been quite a eventful year for myself, as it has been for a lot of us, right? And yeah, if I were to summarize what I do, I would just say focused on making cloud computing learning more accessible and less daunting for everyone. A little bit of my, I guess, employment history. I used to be a cloud engineer. I left that role back in the summer. And I got into cloud through just kind of like working my way up. Prior to that, I was a sysadmin. Prior to that, I did help desk. Prior to that, I worked at an Apple store, which is hell. I don't recommend it to anybody. But yeah, I very much want to handle this more like a conversation than me just blabbing about this kind of stuff. But yeah, the topic I'd like to talk about is documenting your Azure Learning Journey. And I put Azure in there, but you can really apply this information to anything. It doesn't even have to be tech related, but I guess because this is an Azure group and this is a tech space, we can say that it's Azure. And yeah, you might say like, Gwen, what are all these buzzwords? And this sounds like something like some tech Twitter influencer would tweet out. And yes, you're right. But it makes for a great slide deck name and title, so I just put it up there. But really, what it is just synthesizing what you've learned online. This is something that I spent a lot of time doing last year when the pandemic hit and quarantine and all that thing started. I found myself with some spare time, not commuting and such. So I decided to start doing something with the stuff that I had learned. And I do want to start off by just telling everyone that this isn't something that you absolutely have to do. I know there's a lot of pressure with all the social media platforms out there, with LinkedIn, people constantly sharing their successes and their new blog posts and their new YouTube videos and their new live streams and such, and Twitter being, tech Twitter can be somewhat toxic often. But I think if it's handled and it's managed and it's done in a way that is sustainable and we're thinking long term and we're not caring about metrics, it could be something quite useful. And it's been something that that personally I've done and has completely changed and pivoted my career. So some prerequisites before getting started. It's just some things I want to get out of the way. First off, to some extent, most of us are probably already doing this. I know there are a couple of great examples here in the group today. Anaïs, fantastic YouTube channel, Gregor as well. Sarah, I know you also, you have your blog and such. And yeah, to some extent, we're probably already doing this. You just think you're not. And what do I mean by that? I mean, simply by being part of this group here, we're networking, we're meeting new people, right? In tech, we have like this mindset or this habit. And I mean, if it's healthier or not, that's kind of outside of the scope of this presentation. But yeah, what we do is we spend our day learning and doing technical stuff, and then we end our day, and on our free time we keep learning and and trying new technical stuff, right? So maybe you're writing something and you're studying for something and you're taking notes, or you're developing a side project and you're making commits to your GitHub, or maybe you're attending events like this. So that aspect you're already doing, right? So the next step, and to sort of elevate this whole concept of documenting your journey, is you already have the summarized part. Right now, what's missing is synthesizing. So synthesizing is basically just grabbing whatever information that you've made. Let's take example of like you read a book and you write notes, you summarize it, right? But in order for that information to really be of value for you, you have to go the extra step of to really understand it and then write it out in your own words, correct? So this can be applied to anything. So if we take the examples that I mentioned previously, the notes that you are taking when you study your certification or whatever it is that you're studying, are you doing something with those notes? Are you really referencing them, or are you just writing notes because it makes you feel like productive, whatever that might be? The code that you are writing and that you're committing to GitHub, is it documented well? Is it something that you could reference later on, or is it something that later, if you decide to open source, like can others easily just dive in and help? The meetings that you are attending, the networking opportunities that you are attending, are you really meeting people, or are you simply just logging on, sort of listening but not really, and then on to the next? So yeah, it's really about just taking that next step. It's like, okay, I have this information, there's something of value here, but how do I make it more more useful to myself, right? And then you may ask, well, why should I do this, right? Or what would others possibly gain from me doing this? And to those questions, right off the bat, I can tell you that second half there, why would others possibly gain anything from it? Like, don't even care about that. I think that isn't up to you. That really is up to other people to see, what they can gain from it. So don't even worry about that, especially when you're getting started. But that for the first half, why I should do it, I think that is something that you really need to think about. And I don't know, have like a sticky note, or maybe have it as your wallpaper or something, and constantly remind yourself why it is that you're doing something. In terms of this learning journey, when you're just getting started, your audience is one person. There's one person listening, there's one person watching, there's one person reading, and that's you, right? So who has the most to gain from this kind of stuff? Who could learn the most from the stuff that you make? Is you. So when you're starting out, it's selfish, right? And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm throughout this talk here, I do want to use my own experience as an example, just because I can talk better of it that way. But yeah, so I remember when I was getting started, my first YouTube video was almost a year ago, and I really just did it to document things that I wanted to be able to reference later on. And yeah, I was the only dedicated cloud resource on the team, and I didn't really have someone to go back and forth with in terms of the things that I was implementing. So I just put it on YouTube, and as I figured stuff out, I threw it up on YouTube because, hey, if it helped me, it might be able to help someone else, right? But I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm gonna get thousands of subscribers. Oh, I'm gonna make money off ads, or oh, I'm gonna gain thousands of followers on Twitter, right? If the answer to this question is based on metrics, you're not going to have a fun time. All right. So a couple more things that I would consider prerequisites before you actually jump in and start documenting your journey is, time is always going to be an issue. And the commitments that I have, the things that I have to do, my work schedule, all that kind of stuff is going to be completely different than, what others do. And yeah, that's something that you have to, figure out on your own. And there's no real answer here, as cliche as that sounds. Like, it's just different for all of us. A few things that I can say is, if you were to sacrifice quality or quantity, you're always going to want to do better. Like, you'd rather create like one solid quality blog post over 4 mediocre ones. And if you are, again, focused on an honest answer as to why you're doing this, and you're not focused on metrics, it makes more sense to focus on quantity. So if you have the time to do just one every other week, or one a month, even so, that's going to be better. Again, you got to think long term, and especially with these things at the beginning, the getting into it, it's just like super slow, and you really think no one's listening. You really think so if you're focused on just doing more and more and more and more, and you're not seeing the results that you expect, it's going to be draining, right? The second thing I have here is being yourself is always going to work a lot better than, putting on a show or having gimmicks or such. It's easy to say, want to copy someone else's style, or like you see this all the time on tech Twitter, the same JavaScript jokes, the same who should I follow lists, these same patterns, right? And it kind of feels like we lack authenticity in the space in general. So, it's an opportunity to be yourself and to really stick out, as cliche as it sounds. This presentation is going to be filled with cliches, right? And this last point here is the rest comes, which I truly, truly do believe that if you are focused on creating the best that you absolutely can, and, you're not worried about metrics, surprisingly, all those things come. People start watching, people start listening, and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. Oh, and this last point here, you most likely have all the gear you need. Yes, you probably have everything you need. If you're on this call, you most likely have a webcam, a microphone, you obviously have a computer, internet connection. Yeah, you don't need to go and buy out anything. There are, different platforms in terms of like, hey, I want to write. So you can start a blog on Hashnode or on Dev or on your GitHub. Hey, I want to make videos, YouTube, or maybe you like live streaming more, Twitch. There's so many opportunities, right? All right, so I'd like to, when I speak about like what I guess creating or documenting your learning journey is a couple of phases. So the first one is getting started, and the question I get most often is like, all right, I want to do this, but like, what am I supposed to talk about, right? And how do I become comfortable doing this? And the answer to both of those questions is the same. You hide yourself behind stuff that you know, right? So I'll again, using my own journey as an example, these are just a screenshot of some of my like first videos. So this was 11 months ago, and you can see that there's a pattern here. They're all Azure Functions related. I think from my videos, like the first 3 to 4 months, it's just all Azure Functions, mainly because that's the stuff I had the most experience with, and the stuff that I had the most like hands. I was actively working on that stuff and actively learning about functions, so it made the most sense for me to talk about that kind of stuff. Because when you're getting started, you also have to, I'm going to use YouTube as the example, you have to learn how to edit and how to script and how to, actually use YouTube and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's going to be less work if you're doing something that you're already comfortable with. And it's like very much that make it until you fake it kind of mentality, where, you know, you kind of hide behind what you're comfortable with. I also get the question of how do I become comfortable in front of a camera or speaking or stuff like that. And really, it's just practice. The more you do this, the easier it becomes. And again, if you're focused on being yourself and you're not trying to put on a show or anything like that, it's kind of easy to just like, you know, talk about stuff that you're truly interested in, right? The next question I often get is, how do I get my voice heard? Okay, you're sharing, you're creating this content that you genuinely stand behind, and you're learning, and you want to share what you're learning with other people. And there's a pretty simple answer to that. Is most of us probably already have some kind of social platform, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. So like I remember when I was getting started, I shared this is the actual Reddit post that I shared on the Azure subreddit. So I shared the video and I commented like the top comment, which was something like, hey, this is my first tutorial. I'd love some feedback. And I actually got some pretty good feedback. Everyone was genuinely nice, which is surprising for Reddit. But yeah, and people were telling me like, hey, I like your style. And then someone told me that the audio was too low. So yeah, there's feedback, and you know, you're sharing it, and then you get better. It's not all daisies, of course. There are some negatives, and there's some people who are not going to like your face, are not going to like your voice, are not going to like the way you breathe. They're not going to like, I don't know, the hat that you wear, really. So yeah, just, you know, sharing it online, right? Oh, another question that I get asked here is how do I get into the habit, right? Because it's easy to get like super motivated and like, yeah, I'm going to create content, and yeah, I'm going to learn this, and I'm going to share my notes online and whatever it is. And, you know, then the actual work kicks in, and, you know, that motivation or that inspiration lasts for maybe a video or two. But after that, it's really like force a habit that keeps you going. So when I was getting started, I had this, I hope you can see this screenshot here, but I had this schedule, which was, you know, day one, I would research. So I would pick, you know, some sort of topic, something Azure Functions related typically. And then I would just find like different blog posts or different videos and just really learn. And so I can come off as I knew what I was talking about. And day two was scripting. People get surprised when I say that this is a big part of my videos until this day, and the stuff that I do at A Cloud Guru. Yes, I script everything that I'm going to say, even if it's like, hey guys, that's scripted. Then there's the day three, which is practicing. Yeah, like once you have the script, you practice, and it's kind of a, like if you were to see how I practice my scripts, it'd probably be a little weird, because I'm genuinely just saying like, hey guys, today we're talking about this, and like just going through it and refining the script. And like if there's pauses, I sometimes like I'll put a little dash in there to remind me that there should be a pause and things like that. So this loops into like the first one, like how do you become comfortable? You practice, right? And scripting helps with that. Day four is recording. So, you know, depending on your style, you might have more of like a vlog style, or more of like just sitting at my desk and filming the screen and using like a camera to film my face. Or maybe you just do screen and your voice, you know, however it is, however you're comfortable, whatever your style is, that's the day to do that. Day five is editing. At the beginning, editing was just such, yeah, it was hard. You know, learning any creative tool, I guess, as technical people, it sometimes could be a little counterintuitive. But it's been a lot of fun, and you know, you get quicker as you get going, and you learn the shortcuts and such. And then there's day six, which is publish, and then that would be just uploading and then sharing on, you know, Twitter and Reddit and such. And then one thing I forgot to add in here, which is to not obsess over how many views you're getting. It's like YouTube has like a YouTube studio app on that you can have on your phone, and you can watch like how many views you get. But that's not like a healthy thing to do. So I would recommend, like, once you publish, just, you know, sign off, take some time, and then, you know, take the day and go right back into the routine of you know, figuring out what's the next thing you're going to make. So that's like phase one, I would say. I'm gonna take a break here to see if I can check the chat. 1 second. Take a quick water break. 1 second. All right. Where are we? Here we are. All right. So next phase, experimenting. We're human beings. Yeah, of course, right? I think in tech, it's so easy for us to forget that we're actual, we're not bullet points of technical skills on a resume. We're not just like, hey, I know all these, I have all these certifications. Like, hey, I know all these programming languages. Like, it seems like we try to qualify who we are and describe who we are through those instead of like, hey, I'm a human. I enjoy doing this. On my free time, I enjoy doing that, So that the same goes with as you create, whatever it is that you're creating, you should take note of what it is that you actually enjoy of the process, right? Because you're whatever it is that you're building, whatever platform, if you're writing your blog, or if you're creating videos, it's your channel. Whatever it is that you're actually building doesn't have to be the same the entire time. And I think that's actually a recipe for disaster. I could not imagine me current day still creating videos on Azure Functions. It's still my favorite service, absolutely. But I don't think that would have been like sustainable for myself. So it was a couple of months in, and this was around the summertime of last year. And I had wanted to try different types of videos out, a little bit more casual, less tutorial, more talking about giving insight into the field and not a tutorial, right? And don't get me wrong, I was scared because up until then, it's like, oh well, I know this and I can speak of this, but will people actually listen to me if I talk about something differently or yeah, it's just like imposter syndrome. Like, but again, we have imposter syndrome throughout our entire career in tech, so there's no way of shaking it. So anyway, I released these 2 videos. So getting into cloud engineering, and then how I became a cloud engineer with no college degree. And like I mentioned, I was terrified to release these videos, but to this date, these are the most successful videos on my channel. And because of these videos, I have landed a bunch of invites to podcasts, and Scott Hanselman saw that first one, the Getting into Cloud Engineering, and then he invited me on to Azure Friday to talk about that. Yeah, my channel gained a little bit of clout. And yeah, the audience grew and such, but I was terrified of doing that. Terrified of like stepping out of my way, but I'm glad I did, because this is going to lead into a topic further on. But yeah, I guess the main point here is to just say, don't be afraid to experiment, try new things. As human beings, we have interests in different things, and there's no reason why we can't bring those different things into tech, right? It just doesn't have to be all technical skills. Like, you can learn different things. You can. This was my way of trying to bring more casual conversations into the cloud computing space. And in a way, I was just, if you watch these videos, I'm extremely nervous in them. But it was a way of me of learning. And I do want to redo these videos at some point this year and kind of compare them, because you got to sort of like measure where you're at as well. And if I'm still extremely nervous and I don't know what I'm talking about in the newer versions of these videos, and maybe, I'll have to do some more reflecting on that. Another example of experimenting is, so up until this date, I had been focused on sort of like developer technologies at my cloud engineering role. And I had been interested in sort of diving into more architecting topics and services and such. So I figured, hey, why not try to get like the 303 certification, which is the one dedicated to solutions architecting. And I thought of like, well, how can I keep myself accountable? Since I had this channel, I figured like, why not just create a series on these notes that I'm doing? Like, I'm studying every day, and in a way of like synthesizing my notes a little bit better. I uploaded the series. I think there's like 10 videos in this series. And it's been one that has been not referenced, but interacted with the most. And still to this was done sometime, I believe, in August. And till this day, I still get messages on LinkedIn of people like thanking me for explaining or sharing and stuff like that. But little do they know that the benefit was all mine. But yeah, so between the two stages of getting started and experimenting, which is this one, I think you can, go back and forth as you grab some sort of topic that you're trying out and you really enjoy it. You can go back into the phase of consistently creating, stuff around that topic. And then you can switch over to experiment once you're looking for a new challenge and such. But for me, there was this next stage, which is called, I couldn't find a better word for it. So I put evolving. Might not be the best one, but hey, it makes for a nice title, right? So towards in August of last year, I always thought that, once I became an engineer, everything was going to be peachy. Like I was, that's all I needed, right? I needed that title. I need that cloud engineer title. I'm going to feel fulfilled and I'm going to feel like, everything makes sense and such. And like, that's going to be my career. And that's what I'm passionate about. And don't get me wrong, it was exciting. Obviously high salary and like different opportunities opened up for myself and for the family and such, but I didn't necessarily feel fulfilled and I didn't necessarily feel like I was doing what I wanted to do. I was definitely being challenged, but it didn't feel 100%. So I left that role back in the summer and I took some time to do some consulting opportunities, which have become a thing because of the channel in a way that the channel sort of evolved into like my resume, my portfolio. So I started working for myself and I kept on creating content and I kept on participating in events and meeting new amazing people and such and just really just thinking about like, okay, so what is this that I'm doing and what is like, how does this turn into a career, right? So then the opportunity to join A Cloud Guru came about, and it's kind of full circle because my introduction to actually learning anything cloud related had been because of A Cloud Guru and Linux Academy back like 5 years ago, perhaps. And I always thought that, man, creating content, like sharing with others and teaching others, probably really cool. But I never thought like I would have anything of value to share and such. So anyway, yeah, the opportunity to join them came about, and it was a no-brainer, right? So now I'm focused on, like I mentioned, creating content that's more accessible and makes the space less daunting for others. And I still create like a lot of Azure content. Don't get me wrong. There's a series called ACG Fundamentals where it's focused on beginners and people who are just getting started with Azure. And we did how to analyze costs, and we talk about budgets and like a whole bunch of stuff like that. Stuff that I wish I would have seen before I got started. And I still talk about functions, of course. My absolute first video on ACG is a 20-minute video about Azure Functions. Absolutely. But that kind of left me in this interesting situation where I still had my channel and it was still growing, and the question was just like, what am I going to do? Like, do I really want to spend my day, creating technical content at work and then signing off and doing the same? The answer was absolutely not. That was just a recipe for disaster. So I had been wanting to change directions of my channel anyway, but again, it was just terrifying because change is terrifying. But at the beginning of this year, I was just like, whatever, man, F it. I'm just gonna do it. So I started creating different kinds of videos. So I started sharing more about like life experiences and stuff being in space. For example, my biggest mistake as a cloud engineer, which I talked about how I spent $1,000 on Azure Service Bus because I forgot to remove the resource after playing around with it. I talk about how I became an Azure Microsoft MVP, whatever insight I could provide to that. I talk about money and cloud certifications and health goals that I have for the year, and it's probably one. The feedback on that particular video was, it really got to me. There was a lot of people who shared their own goals in the comments with me, and it really just reminded me, like, wow, we're all just trying to make it, especially with what has happened in this past year. We're all just trying to make it, and community really does matter. And sometimes I feel like all that we need is just someone to like get the conversation going. I was quite afraid to upload that video because I do speak about some physical issues that I've been having and I've been trying to work with, but it's done well. I made a smart mirror. I actually made this two-way mirror thing with a Raspberry Pi. And there's this open source software called a Magic Mirror, and you can build these different modules that display different kinds of information. It's based on Node.js. And I had always been wanting to do it, but I just never had the time. And this is something that I was able to do. I think it was like 2 weeks ago. It's a little project that I did with my father. And I recorded the whole thing and I shared it, and people were quite interested in it. But this is something that I would have never allowed myself to do back when I was just focused on creating content around like my Azure Functions learning journey. I talk about failure. This video I released, I think, like 2 days ago. That I've been learning Linux lately, somewhat obsessed, and I had taken my LPI 101. I think it was last weekend, and I didn't pass, and I wasn't going to originally share that news, but then I decided, like, I mean, if I'm really going to be honest to myself, I think it's something that might be able to provide others, like, hey, we're not experts. Like, yeah, I have an award that says like, oh, I know what I'm talking about, but there's just stuff that I have no idea what's going on, right? So yeah, it was great to see the feedback on that too, and people saying like, hey, I failed this exam like 2 times, and it's nice to hear other people like come together around that. Yeah, so it's turned into something I never expected it to be, really. I really just started like just making videos because I wanted to, and it's pivoted and transformed my career. And finally, I guess the best piece of advice I could give anybody is just, be yourself at your own pace. And it's easy to get sucked into everyone sharing all their successes and everyone sharing all the amazing stuff they're working on. But behind all those successes, there's a lot of like multiple attempts of not succeeding. So like, don't get sucked into any of that. At your own pace, be yourself. As cliche as it sounds, it's the truth. And finally, thank you all. You can find me on Twitter at Made by GPS, on YouTube, youtube.com/madebygps. Lately, I've been trying to cut down the social media usage just because we all know it's been a heavy news cycle for the year, really. How do I stop sharing here? Here we are. Yeah, so it's been like a heavy news cycle. So I've been trying to get less anxious by watching the news and being on social media and such. But yeah, that's me. I'm always open to talking to people, though I take time to get through everything. I promise I'll always be there to answer questions and such. And I think opportunities to talk at these groups are fantastic. I have a couple of people in mind that I'd love to encourage them to participate. I think spaces like these are though they're not like massive audiences, like it's fun to just talk and be honest with others, right? And it's great to see people who are I speak of like Gregor and Sarah. I know you all have been in the field for years and have a lot of experience, and you help us out, like encouraging us newbies to keep going, and I think that's very special. And I want to thank you all for that, and hope encourage that for others, because you know, as a woman and as a person of color, it's hard. So, you know, yeah, that's really it. Thank you all. Questions, comments, anything really?
Awesome. Thank you for that. Has anybody got any questions about anything? Or have we all gone shy again?
What's been the best part of your journey, Gwyneth?
Meeting you.
I can't say that. I can't say that.
Okay, my second best part. I think you know, just sometimes I'll get a message that, you know, someone will tell me like, hey, like I was about to quit or about to stop learning or something, and just, you know, seeing you know, go through stuff kind of kept me going. That stuff really gets to me. Just knowing that it's somewhere someone's getting value out of the nonsense that I speak. You know, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, I found the whole thing really interesting. I thought it was interesting how you said you were hesitant to post the fact that you failed one of the exams as well. I didn't think about that at all. You know, it's everybody fails at something. You can't do everything right the first time. Failures are how we learn to be better. It's how you deal with it moving forward that really matters. Very brave of you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think, you know, normalizing, you know, failures in the field, it's hard. You all know that it's hard to like not feel like you always have to be doing, you always have to be learning, you always have to be on top of your game.
Yeah. I think the first time I failed an exam, I was embarrassed to go back to the office. So I hid in a coffee shop with a big bit of chocolate cake to console myself until I had the confidence to go back.
That's the fix for everything though, isn't it? That's a universal fix for every problem in life.
Absolutely.
I know, but like when I said, we all fail, and when I went back to the office to tell everybody, and they're like, "Did you pass?" And I'm like, "No, I failed." And then they were like, "Oh, I failed such and such and stuff." So it's just, it's just part of it, and I've got used to that now. So I have failed other Azure exams. You know, I haven't always passed first time round, but what the failure always teaches you is that where you are in terms of your learning journey, maybe you haven't put enough effort into it, or maybe you need to go and look at another area that you thought you knew or something like that. So there's always something you can learn from it, whether you pass or fail, I think. So it's worth trying. That's what I always say to people. Yeah,
definitely.
When you fail an exam, it feels like you're the only person that's ever failed an exam.
Yeah.
Everybody else.
I failed my first 2 exams, which wasn't a great start.
I was just going to say the exact same. The first exam I did, Windows Servers 2012, I think it was configuring and managing, and that was one of those. And I think failure is just as much about, it helps you grow as much as just succeeding. Because you really take a step back. I thought I was magic at this. I thought I was amazing. Just, you know, here, take a step back, think about it, look at what has happened, and it just goes, oh, you know what? I could have tried harder at this part here, and just gives you more goals, really.
Yeah, it's almost like it does more for you than actually succeeding.
Yeah, you can go through and just keep succeeding and tripping through life, but sometimes you hit a roadblock. You can really take a step back and look at everything.
Right, definitely.
What's your channel?
My YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Let me post it to the chat. Do I have to put HTTPS? Come on.
I'll definitely give that a wee subscription. That's
there. There we are.
Gwyneth, do you find talking like these easier, or as time goes by, or do you still struggle? Because I hate talking about these things. I always will.
Well, I just like talking about myself, but I think it's kind of awkward. But I also, as much as I may come off comfortable or whatever it is in a camera, it still gives me a lot of anxiety and such. So I enjoy it because it's a challenge, and I enjoy meeting people. And you know, I'm such a homebody, and I'm always just here working, and it's nice to, even if it's just virtually, connect with y'all. Does it get easier? It hasn't gotten easier.
Oh, There's definitely going to be light at the end of the tunnel, and I think everybody who hates public speaking hopes it will get easier the more you do it.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. I can't imagine doing it actually in person. I mean, I look forward to eventually having the opportunity to do it at, some actual physical conference. But wow, I just the thought of that seems a little daunting.
Yeah, it's definitely a different skill. I did a lot of in-person presenting, and then I've had to change to virtual. It's very, very different. I don't know if I prefer either one, to be honest. I think they're both nerve-wracking. But I suppose the good thing is, with a virtual one, you can hide until your time and then just turn on your camera. Whereas when you're in person, you're probably standing up on stage while the room fills, and that's horrible. It's like where do I stand? Where do I put my hands? Do I not say hello to people? Am I making a weird face that they're going to take a picture of? Like, there's so many different things, but yeah, I can't wait to get back to that. Just for the sticker sharing, if nothing else.
That was great. I enjoyed that.
No, it was really great. Thank you very much. And
thank you all.
Good that you've come up here and given what isn't the usual that you would see. It wasn't very technical. I think it was fab.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. Like I mentioned, I think it's a great place for I guess beginners also to get a little bit more comfortable with speaking whatever it is that they want to speak about. And it's also a great skill set to be able to, when you think of like interviewing, it's sort of like an interview, like a job interview, like getting the skills about being able to talk about something is very important too. And I feel like, because of where the world is, it's kind of hard to get that exposure. So yeah, these meetups are quite nice. I need to make sure to attend more of them.
Awesome. Cool beans. Well done to everybody. Thank you to our fabulous speakers. What we're going to do, I think, is our next meetup is in April. And I think, like we talked about during the break earlier on, we'll try and do a kind of lightning talk user group with a bunch of speakers. So if you want to speak, please do reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you with that. Yeah, we'd love to have you all speaking. And yeah, thank you everybody. Appreciate all your time. And yeah, please do reach out if you were a quiz winner, and we can organise your prizes. So thank you everybody. And yeah, have a good night and stay safe everybody.